The world's top swimmers will be in Shanghai this month for the World Aquatic Swimming World Cup. Among them, China's very own Olympic stars. Some have been on the receiving end of extreme attention from fans since their return from Paris. And CNA's Guan finds out what's behind China's so-called toxic fans.
When top Chinese gymnast Zhang Bohen landed at Beijing airport, he had to be escorted out by security after being forced to hide in the toilet from hordes of fans. He's not alone. When double gold medalist diver Quan Hongchan was in Macau on her post-Olympic victory tour, she was also mobbed at her hotel and forced to take refuge at the toilet too. These scenes remind Xiao Jie of her days as an ardent fan of a particular singer-songwriter. She knows how crazy fans can get, and for that reason, she's asked to mask her real identity for this interview.
我也是做过粉丝的，所以我知道，粉丝可能对于他 idol 的一些评论都比较敏感的，所以我比较害怕。
In her days as a fan, Xiao Jie has done her fair share of going head over heels over her idol.
我那个时候一个月工资可能6、7千吧，然后我可能看一场演唱会的花费，一张票可能就是5000多，然后可能它不一定在上海开，我还要在往返在那个城市的这个机票的钱。 然后还有酒店的钱，然后还有吃饭的钱，可能看一场演唱会，总共的花费就能够超过我1个月的工资了。
As a counselor, Dr. Hu has encountered far worse. He once counseled a nurse who chalked up 500,000 yuan or $70,000 in debt just chasing after her idol. Dr. Hu was called in after debtors started showing up at the hospital.
粉丝他其实是在寻求归属感，那么组织的粉丝他其实是有资本推动，那么跟粉丝本身的情感推动，一旦发生了叠加或者说发生了重合，那这个时候他爆发出的这种情感的力量很大。
Fans screaming over their idols, coughing up good money, egged on by entertainment companies. All that's nothing new. But there's something different about the adoring fans that are descending on China's sporting stars. For one, there are no entertainment companies involved. For another, there are no official fan clubs. So who or what is driving the chaos? And it's chaos indeed. Remember Quan Hongchan, who's mobbed in Macau? This was the scene outside her home in rural Guangzhou. According to social media reports, the adoring mobs were so bad, the family couldn't even sleep at night. As a psychology professor at a sports university, Dr. He Lingfeng has counseled sporting stars in his office. He thinks the athletes themselves, though through no fault of theirs, may have unknowingly pushed some fans into extreme behaviors. And there are things that can be done to curb the overflow of passion and adoration.
运动员，因为他们每天的生活方式其实就是训练，在这种与人交往、社会表现，或者是能够去迎合粉丝的那个需求去做出表达的时候，他是远远不如电影明星的。 我建议体育队啊，其实是应该给他们提供一些基本的这种训练的。如果体育明星呢，其实在公众面前出现的时候，如果能够回馈给粉丝他们需要的一些东西，然后再告诉他们接下来应该怎么做，其实就不会出现特别极端的事儿。其实你要知道，就是这些粉丝过来，他们是有要求的。 就是你摆几个 pose 嘛，对吧？你说几句话嘛，然后你安抚一下粉丝嘛，对吧？
Those will be useful tips for authorities here in Shanghai. From October 18 for 3 days, the first leg of the World Aquatic Swimming World Cup will be held here at the Oriental Swimming Complex behind me. All of China's Olympic swimming stars are expected to compete here. given their newfound celebrity status. Authorities would have their hands full keeping the mobs in check without a trick or two. Guan, CNA, Shanghai.
Of course, toxic fandom works both ways. When athletes win, they're worshipped, but lose and they are mercilessly trolled. Well, here to tell us more, we have Mark Dreyer, author of Sporting Superpower, and he is joining us from London. Hi, Mark. Well, thanks for being on East Asia tonight. Well, we heard there, Guan's story was pretty eye-opening. You know, seeing the athletes cowering and hiding in toilets, that's pretty extreme. But from what you have heard, from what you have seen, what are some of the other more jaw-dropping cases of toxic fandom in Chinese sports?
Well, I think as mentioned in the piece, this is not a new thing, particularly. I remember when David Beckham came to China just about 10 years ago, there was a stampede, and I believe 7 or 8 people were actually injured and had to be treated in hospital. More recently, when Lionel Messi was playing in a friendly match in Beijing, I was at the hotel where fans were awaiting his arrival. This was about 18 months or so ago in Beijing. And it was legitimately scary. It was out of control. There weren't nearly enough security guards. The crowds were surging forward every time they thought the bus that may have or may not have been carrying Messi was arriving at the hotel. And I saw some youngish children, not seriously injured, but sort of falling over and trampled to some extent. And it definitely could have got out of control. Authorities realized that there was a problem, and many of Messi's public appearances were then cancelled, and he had to do a lot of online appearances instead. But it's just this extreme, intersection between the sports and the celebrity, whether it's music and entertainment stars, whether it's sports. It's this passion from the fans that kind of spills out of control. And then added to that, you just have the numbers in China where you get the crowd sizes larger than you would in other parts of the world, and it can turn into fairly scary situations, as I said, with potential stampedes or people cowering in toilets, as we heard earlier.
Yeah, and Mark, I mean, social media, a breeding ground for toxic fans. And I'm wondering, how much responsibility do you think platforms like Weibo or Douyin bear in terms of, enabling abusive behavior? And I believe in China, the government recently, there was this crackdown. There was this Beijing's Public Security Bureau's recent actions where they arrested, certain suspects. Do you think all those measures are enough?
Well, there's been official messaging to basically tone it down. That's the message to the fans. I think there's a couple of differences with Chinese social media and their sports stars in the West, for example, in other countries and China. Number one, the platforms are very heavily censored. So you're not going to get the level of abuse that many sports stars in the West face. Some of the female tennis players, and they've been in China this week for the China Open in Beijing, they've spoken in the past few weeks about the abuse when they lose a match that they've been facing, and they're sort of speaking out saying it's too much. So you're not going to quite get that level of offensiveness, but you do have people that are out of control in terms of their excitement. Pan Jianle, who's China's probably top swimming star, he won 2 gold medals at the Paris Olympics. He spoke about the fact that it was just too much for him, and he actually was contemplating, would it have been better to have actually performed worse and not receive the attention that he's getting. And the final thing I'll say in this is China's sports stars aren't as media trained as perhaps their counterparts in the West. So they're not used to these interactions. They're not used to the press conferences and facing some more pointed questions. It's a little bit more delicate. Chan Huangchen, the diver who we saw, her hometown was overrun. She was a very lively character and welcomed, I think, a lot of that attention, was quite comfortable with it. But it was her family members that sort of found it a bit too much when people were camping outside her home and saying, look, we can't sleep, leave us alone. So you've got the individual personalities, and then you've got the related entourages and the families feeling the hassle there as well. And then you've got the dynamic of China's online platforms too.
And it's not great. I mean, if the athlete is saying that perhaps I should lose, just so that they can avoid getting such attention. But do you think, Mark, you can actually be a champion and stay under the radar these days? Or is it just a pipe dream in the age of social media?
Well, it very much depends on the sports. China won 40 gold medals at the Paris Olympics. So if you pick, 5 or 6 of them who are weightlifters, they're obviously named, they're Olympic champions, no disrespect whatsoever. but they're unlikely to be mobbed in the streets outside of their sort of smaller hometown. So it's the top stars in the top sports. So historically, you've got badminton, table tennis. We have now Zhang Qinwen, a tennis player who's playing in Beijing and getting packed out crowds there. So she is probably just beginning to feel the impacts of the fame. The swimmers, as we've heard, have felt the impact of this as well. So it does very much make a difference as to what sport and how long you've been at the top of the level. But yes, there's a full range of situations, I would say, here.
And national pride, obviously a powerful force when it comes to Chinese sports. How do you think the intense patriotism, for instance, actually sort of perhaps contribute to toxic fandom when things don't go China's way?
Well, the most obvious example is football, soccer. The Chinese football team have been, there's no really nice way to put this, but they've been atrocious for as long as I can remember. And it seems to be, they seem to be still hitting new lows, if that can be believed. A recent game they lost in a World Cup qualifier, so a match of some importance, 7-0 to Japan. And, obviously fans taking out their anger online and the few who are at the stadium as well. So it's been difficult to be a Chinese football player. You've got the whole match fixing elements and other things in there as well. But yes, I can't imagine too many parents are pushing their budding young sporting stars into becoming football players today in China because, even at the top level, there's not a whole lot of adulation. And, as we've heard, the adulation sometimes can be too much. But really in football, it's mostly just abuse.
Right, and seeing the extreme lengths that these fans go to, I'm wondering, do you think sports stars, especially in China and the region, they've reached the same stratosphere as these A-listers, like the actors and actresses?
I think they have, yes, at the top level. So those, the big names in table tennis. Zhang Qinwen is an interesting one because she is the tennis player. She won Olympic gold in the singles competition in Paris. But she's also pretty global and she speaks good English. And that I mention that because it means that she can legitimately become a global star. Then you have, Eileen Gu is another one from the winter sports circle that has that kind of global connection. Then you are sort of faced with this slightly delicate situation where you want the fame, you want the adulation because you have a huge amount of sponsorship and revenue and fans and people who are pushing you to be bigger and be that ambassador at a higher level as possible. Whereas some of these other stars who are just want to focus on their sports, they don't want the attention. They don't necessarily need or get the sponsorships in the same way. So it's a little bit of a balance. So you've got different situations. Some are much more like the pop stars. Others are kind of more in the sporting realm. And then you have sort of the lower profile stars who, depending on the sport, can still keep somewhat of a lower profile in China.
Well, it's been great speaking with you. Thanks so much for your insights. Mark Dreyer, author of Sporting Superpower.